All right, very good. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. To the topic today that we're going to be talking about is buyer conversion. And things are going to be a little bit different in this, this presentation probably than some things that you've heard in the past. So just, just to give me sort of a way to make this more meaningful for all of you, would everybody, reach out and share what is the challenge that they're having working with buyers today? One challenge that each person is having a challenge with.
Interest rates.
Interest rates?
Before Measure O seemed to be a little bit of a roadblock, and now it's they want something, lack of inventory. They want something that's not out there. I don't know if that's lack of inventory.
We still have a lack of inventory?
Well,
Yeah, less than 300.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. It used to be 75 or something crazy like that. So I thought 300 sounded big. I guess it's not.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a matter of perspective. Mary, any challenges that you're experiencing with buyers?
The interest rates, as well as they're waiting for prices to go down.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Ed,
Yes, sir.
what's the biggest challenge you're having working with buyers today?
And actually, I've had all the other ones that everybody mentioned. I seem to be able to get through those today. My only problem right now is I have a client who I swear I was going to write up, and they're not in contact with me, and not calling me back. And I don't understand why. I really don't. I don't know on this particular one.
Okay. So you've been ghosted.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I-
Well, yeah, it's interesting to be, ghosting wasn't around necessarily when I first started selling real estate, but it is around now. So it's interesting is the things that everybody pretty much share are objections handling. And so I think that's a little bit different than what I'm experiencing when I talk about buyer conversion. When I talk about buyer conversion and think about it, what I think about first is how do I get somebody that is a buyer and convert them into a closed transaction? And there's a lot of steps to that. And what each of you sort of shared with me, other than being ghosted that Ed, brought up, are objections that we're having when people are already working with us. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'll try and address a little bit sort of how to deal with the objections as I go through the presentation. But what I really want to talk to all of you about is some things that have changed in working with buyers that I've become, sort of familiar with here recently in a more clear way compared to the way that it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 38 years ago when I first started. And so I started off with a quote from Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changin'. So anybody that likes music knows that that's a classic song, the times they are a-changing. Each of us have probably also heard the phrase that the only thing that, that we can count on is change. That's the only thing that is consistent is change. And so when I was thinking about this class and reviewing the notes from the buyer conversion course that we went through a few years ago that came out of RE/MAX, I noticed that there are some things that have been changing. And so, here's a little bit of background on how things have changed. I'm looking to see who's been in the business a long time. And there's not anybody that goes back to when I first started, but the real estate business has changed from being a broker-centric business, being broker-centric, real estate broker-centric, to an agent-centric business, to today where it is a client-centric business. And what I mean by broker-centric is back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the business was largely in the broker's control. The real estate brokers, covered all of the expenses. The commission splits were 40%, 40-60, 50-50. The brokers paid for almost everything. And the agent, basically their job was to sit in the office and buyers would be provided to them by the broker, and they would earn the smaller portion of the fee. That changed in the 1980s into the early 2000s, and it became much more agent-centric. And what changed is that agents, instead of waiting for the buyers to provide leads to them, started providing leads to themselves on their own. The best and clearest example of that would be Tim Wood. He was a Spencer agent, and Spencer Real Estate was a broker-centric company that had by far the largest market share in Big Bear. And Tim sort of implementing things where he became independent of the brokerage in order to provide himself leads. And because he was independent and being able to provide himself leads, he wanted to get a larger commission split. So we have a situation where it's broker-centric, where the brokers are providing leads, to an agent-centric business where the agents are starting to provide their own leads and demanding a higher commission split, to where the market is today, which is client-centric. And there's a really important reason why that has changed. Can anybody sort of think about what happened around 1995 in the early 2000s?
Internet.
That was such a major thing for the real estate
Internet.
business.
The internet.
The internet is exactly it. The information changed. And so prior to 1995, that's when I really remember the internet first starting, was that before that, the customer had to come to the real estate broker or the agent in order to get the information. Not only did they have to come to get the information, but they had to get access into the house. And so the only way they could do that was they could come to a real estate agent or a brokerage. In 1995, that change started becoming available to the public on the internet. And that has only increased over the last 27 years. Makes sense? Okay. So here's some of the things that have changed because it became client-centric. The clients have taken control. They don't need us for the information. And what's really important is that we may or may not know more than our client already knows. It's really important to know that. I remember going back, I'm trying to think of how many years ago it was. It was probably 2006, 2007, is I had a listing and I was sending updated comparable information to a seller, sort of giving him an update on what was changing with the market. And his response really floored me. He says, I've already seen all of that on Redfin, Mark. That's nothing new. And so what was happening is that there are clients that are getting information. Some of them are getting it much faster than we are. That was the first time I got the idea in my head is sometimes our clients are paying attention to information they're getting it before we're giving it to them. Here's the other reason why it's so important to preview the new inventory in person, is that if you're looking at new inventory MLS and looking at the picture, you don't know anything more about the houses that you're showing than the clients can tell by looking at Zillow and Realtor.com and the other websites. Does that make sense? Okay, so what has changed is, is we may or may not have better information than the customers do, but ultimately the balance of power is more equal today, and the client behavior has changed as a result. Buyers have many choices of who to work with today. They can use their friends down the hill, they can use their lender, and they can use us. So we have to do something, or we have to share something with them that gives them a reason to use us versus their friends off the hill or their lender friends or any other agent that's here in town. So today, the only thing that we really have to offer our clients that is of value is not necessarily information. If we have better information, that's good, but they don't know that until they talk with us. Does that make sense? How many of you have ever had a buyer come up and hand you a list of things and say, I want to see these homes? Has anybody had that? Ed has. I've had that. For those of you, I can't see your pictures. I can't see if you're raising your hands or not. Mickey has. Okay, there you go. Paul has got that too as well. So, it's important to realize that because our customers are receiving information on the internet and other places, they don't know that we know anything more than they do until we talk with them. That's really important. I know a lot of times I get sort of offended when a buyer questions me. I mean, they're from Newport Beach, or they're from, Ventura, or they're from some other area, and they start telling me what's happening in the Big Bear market, and I get sort of offended. It's like, I've been up here for 38 years, and, how can you be telling me about the market that I wouldn't already know? Well, they don't know what I know. They don't know that. And so having that attitude that I just shared with you is pretty counterproductive when you're meeting a buyer and you want to convert them to a client. So I'm going to point out what today's buyers want. It's not necessarily information, because they think they have all the information that they need from the internet. What they do want is they want instant gratification. They want us to drop everything and be available to answer the questions that they have and to be able to help them. Think about the world that we're in. If you want a book, you type in Amazon.com, you type in the name of the book, 24 hours later, it shows up in your mailbox or shows up at your front door. When you go into McDonald's today, you don't even have to talk to the people up at the front. You can go to their little kiosk and you can say, I want a double-double. No, it's not a double-double. Yeah, I want a hamburger and French fries and a Coke, and I can get the #1, or I can get, the Egg McMuffin. And you go onto the kiosk and you punch it in, use your credit card, pay for it, and 2 minutes later they say, number 22, your order's up, and you go get your order. Okay, that's the society that we're in today, and that's what the buyers want. That's what the buyers want. Now, it probably isn't realistic to buy a house in the same way that the buyers buy a hamburger at McDonald's, or buy a book on Amazon, or buy a treadmill on the internet and have it delivered. Whatever it is that they're buying today, it's not realistic to buy a house in that way. But bear in mind, that's what they want. They want instant gratification. So sometimes the best value that you can provide to a buyer today is to be available. Because if you're not available, the customer can find another agent that might be available. You guys ever thought about that? You get a new buyer. Well, I'm only available Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4. The buyer says, I don't know you. I don't know what you stand for. I don't know anything about your company. And 2 to 4 on Saturday afternoon is not convenient for me. I'm sure I can find somebody that will meet me at 10 a.m. or somebody that will talk to me at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Okay. The buyers are looking for instant gratification. And until you have a relationship with them, until you have some value that you've demonstrated to them, anything that you put in front of them that blocks their desire for instant gratification is an opportunity to lose them. So if you want to convert leads into buyers in 2023, you have to be aware of that. Another thing that they want is control. I'll do things my way, not yours. I want to do it on my time frame. I want to do it in the way that I want to do it. I think this question came up in one of the classes or coaching calls that I had recently, where people said, well, what's the best way to communicate with your clients? The best way is to ask them. The best way is, do you want me to communicate by text? Do you want me to communicate by email? Do you want to talk on the phone? When's the best time? I think there's some instant messaging things that you can do out there. How do you want to look at inventory? Do you want to keep looking at it on realtor.com or Zillow? Can I send you listings for us to go through? Would you like to do a Zoom meeting to where we can go through the inventory together? The question is how do you do it in a way that is of value to the client? Well, I only send things out of my MLS. That's how I work. The buyers have control. They have information. They have options. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope it does. I hope it does. That the customers are more in control today. And until you have won them as a client, you have to be really, really open to doing things the buyer's way. That means doing it on their time, and that means doing it in the way that they want to communicate and the way that they want to look at inventory. The other thing is that they don't want pressure. A lot of buyers are saying, don't ask me for an appointment. Don't ask me for a buyer broker agreement. Don't ask me for a commitment. I mean, they won't even sometimes commit to the time that they're going to show up to look at a house. I'll be up there Saturday. I'd like to see this house. Well, what time will you be here? I'm available between 10 and 12. Oh, I don't know. They won't commit, right? So they don't want pressure and they don't want commitments. Another thing that buyers are after today, a lot of them, is they want to save money. So a lot of times when you're at least talking with somebody in the very beginning, is they're going to say, are you the listing agent? Why do you think they're asking you the question if you're the listing agent?
Because they think they're going to get a break on the price if the agent double ends it. Okay.
And I think you were going to say exactly the same thing, right, Ed?
I was.
Okay. That's a true story. Okay. Is that, a good portion of the buyers that we're talking about today, they're doing their own searching. They don't think that, a lot of times they don't think that they need an agent. They don't need anybody to help them until they get to the point where they want to look at something to buy it. Now think about this. You get a lead, whether it's Zillow or Realtor.com or your own personal website. It doesn't matter how they got to you. They get to you in the very beginning. When you have that very first conversation with them, they've talked to you for a total of less than 1 minute. But they may have been spending the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months looking at inventory and searching on the internet and doing their own research and talking to their friends. They are in the buying process themselves, and they've known you for exactly 1 minute. Think about that for a second. How much loyalty do you expect? You shouldn't expect for any. Okay. So a lot of times, a lot of the people that we're dealing with, especially some of the higher educated people like attorneys and other real estate agents and people whose friends, tell them, hey, you don't need an agent to do that. They think that they're going to find their home on the internet. They're going to contact the listing agent who's going to write it up for them, and they're going to be able to save the commission because they don't have their own agent. They feel like they're their own agent because they've done their own work. So I hope all of you guys understand that's the mindset of the buyers that we have today. Okay. The last thing that I want to point out that buyers are looking for today is they really want to buy a house. Looking for houses is no fun. Okay. People don't go looking for houses if they don't want to buy houses. Is there anybody that is not looking to buy a new car right now? Raise your hand if you're not looking to buy a new car right now. Okay. How many of you have spent time in the last 2 weeks looking online for new cars? Nobody. If you don't want to buy a car, you're not going to look for cars. If you don't want to buy a house in Big Bear, you're not going to be looking for houses in Bear. So when somebody reaches out to you with those questions, there's a high likelihood that they actually do want to buy a piece of property or a house in Big Bear. And that's our golden ticket. That's our golden ticket. That's the thing that we can do to help them. So this means if we give them what they want, they're going to be more inclined to use us if we give them what they want. And gratification, which is control, doing things the way that is comfortable for them, not applying a lot of pressure to them. Okay, does that make sense? So that's sort of background in order to give you what I want to say is a two-step process buyers. That's the mindset of the buyers today. So there's a two-step process, and the two-step process is this. The first thing is we need to win the client first. first and foremost, we need to win the client. The second step is once you win the client over and you put them into your system and they become a client, you will have a buyer process. You'll have a best practices. You'll have a standard operating procedure of how you work with people. You'll have a checklist of how you work with them when you're writing an offer and when you're going through escrow. What I just shared with you, the process, we're going to talk about that in our next class. Okay. The rest of today's class, we're going to talk about how to win the client. So I'm going to suggest something to you right now that I think a lot of you might have a challenge with. I'm going to suggest to you that when you first speak with a client, that you consciously abandon your self-interest completely, which is designed to help sell them a house really quickly, and simply be 1000% client focused. Be totally interested in them and them only. Abandon things like asking these questions. I don't want you to ask them if they're pre-qualified in your first conversation. I'm going to suggest that you don't ask them if they're working with another agent in the first conversations you have with them. I'm going to suggest to you that you don't offer them all the details of the home that they're calling about or reaching out to you about in that first conversation. I didn't say don't talk to them about the house. I said don't offer them all the details. I'm going to ask you not to pull up the property while you're in the middle of the conversation with them in this first contact and interrupt the flow of your conversation with them, because that creates a really unconscious long pause when you're talking with the client in the very beginning. And then it puts you in a position where they're going to start asking you questions and you're going to be giving them answers. They're going to ask you a question. They're going to be pumping you for information. If you pull up the property and have all the details, you're going to become an information booth instead of a person. Okay. I'm going to ask that you don't discuss buyer agency in the very first call that you're talking with them about. And I'm going to ask you not to be reactive, but instead be proactive. So we're going to talk a little about this. So I've asked you to be 1000% interested in the client in the very first conversation that you have with them. So raise your hand if you've been to a timeshare presentation in the past. I think maybe, well, I can't see hands from the other people. I would think that most people have been through a timeshare presentation in the past. If you go back and you think about it, in the timeshare presentations that we've been through, the salesperson always talks to you about you. They talk to you about, how, when was the last time that you came to this location? Is this your first time to Hawaii? Is this your first time to the Pacific Northwest? Is this your first time to Mexico? How often do you go on vacation? How old are your kids? What do your kids do? They talk to you about you. I don't know if you're like me. I like talking to salespeople and getting into a conversation. I like learning about them. And so when I've gone through timeshare presentations, I've asked the salesperson about them, and they refuse to talk about themselves. They've been trained not to talk to you about themselves. They've been trained to talk to you only about you. So we have questions like, they'll say, well, how often do you visit? Do you ski, hike, or bike? Tell me more about that. Where else do you vacation? How many times have you been to Big Bear before? Is it convenient when you come up here to stay? I mean, there's a lot of questions that we can ask people that are about them and their stay in Big Bear rather than giving them other information. Think about when you went through that timeshare thing, you probably walked in and says, I'm not buying anything. I'm here for the discounted nights. I'm here for the $100 gas gift card. I'm here for the discount on the excursions. I mean, I'm going snorkeling with my kids later, and you guys promised me a 50% discount, and I'm not buying anything. How many of us have ever said that to the person in the timeshare presentation that we went through? Okay. And they don't argue with us. They just keep talking to us about us. Have you guys noticed that? And they talk to us for probably an hour, hour and a half. I think it's usually an hour and a half is the time that they say you need to commit to them. So timeshare salespeople are absolutely the best trained people that I have ever run across in sales. They talk to you about you. They don't talk to you about themselves. They don't talk to you about things that are not important to you. They really try and break down all the barriers that are there. I mean, we're already saying, I'm not buying. I'm getting the gas card, I'm getting the excursions, I'm getting the discounted nights, but I'm not buying anything. So it takes them quite a bit of time to break down those barriers. And that's what we need to do in our first step when we're trying to win the client. This starts by stopping doing the things or asking the questions that we've already been trained to do. We've been asked to ask people if they're pre-qualified. Why? To save us time, right? We've been trained to ask them if they're working with another agent. Why? And because we are now in a client-centric world, we can save ourselves a lot of time by blowing out every single buyer lead that we get. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to ask, is there anybody that is having a problem with what I'm sharing with the statements that I've made so far? Guys have to speak up. I know this is.
I can, that whole looking up the property. I did that the other day and I'm like, what am I doing? But it caused that pause you were just talking about it, and it not only, it changes the whole energy of the conversation. It just, it shifts for a minute. It takes a minute to get back to where I was prior to trying to look up a property.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really uncomfortable to meet somebody in the first time. They have an agenda and we have an agenda, okay? Our agenda is to get information about the client so that we can help them. That should be the first thing. The second thing is we want to gather information about them to determine whether we're wasting our time or not. Okay. The clients, they want information too. I mean, the reason why most of them are calling around or sending messages out or emailing for information is they want to avoid contact with us as salespeople, number one, but they want to gather information. And the information that they're gathering is designed to disqualify the property. Okay. And basically what that is they'll say, well, is it located by the ski area? What's the rental income on it? I mean, the information that you give them, what they're doing with that information is they're saying, oh, that's too far away from the ski area. Oh, that's too much money. Oh, that's in bad condition. Oh, that's got to, they're trying to gather information where they can say, you know what, I've disqualified the property. Thank you very much. And they hang up and they've saved time because they're not working with you. They're working on their own, gathering information to try and find a home. So the more information that you give them in the first conversation, the more likelihood that they're going to say that property's not going to work for me. Thank you very much, and hang up. Or you're going to give them so much information that they don't need you going forward. Does that make sense? Now, they may find that, all of the information that you give them is exactly right. But, the reality is, if you think about it, is we don't normally sell the person the house that they call about the first time. We normally don't. And so in our mind, if we're thinking that I'm going to sell this person this house, we're making a huge mistake. We're making a huge mistake. Since most people don't buy the house that they originally call on, it makes sense to us that we shouldn't focus on the house. We should focus on the client. We should be trying to find out everything that we can about the client. So we don't want to push them away. And again, I'm going to remind you of the things I don't want you to ask in that first call. Don't ask them if they're pre-qualified. Don't ask them if they're working with another agent. Don't offer all the details of the home. Don't offer all of that. Do not pull up the property and create a pregnant pause of 30 seconds or a minute and a half while you're pulling up the property. Don't turn yourself into an information booth by doing that. Don't discuss the details of buyer agency. None of that stuff is important to them. It's only important to us. It's not important to them. It's important to us. And so we need to avoid doing that. You're probably going to learn some of the answers to those questions anyway, if you're carefully listening to the client. Your goal is to ask them questions and gather as much information about the client as possible. The longer that conversation goes, the more information the client is going to offer up that's going to help you. So follow the suggestions on the questions that I'm going to be giving you as we follow up here and learn how to ask the right questions in the right way. So both you and the client want information. I've shared that with you. And it takes time for you to get them to start giving you honest information. So let's talk to the client about them. They want to save time by disqualifying the property and maybe disqualifying you. We want to disqualify them by finding out whether they're unqualified or not, and we're going to avoid that. So we're not going to tell the prospect too much detailed information about the house. What we're going to do is we're going to ask them things about them. So here's the steps that I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you 4 of them. 4 things that you want to do when you first talk with them. Offer to show them the property. Offer to show them the property. Well, Mark, why would I want to do that? Think about this. Why would I want to show somebody property until I know if they're working with another agent, until I know they're pre-qualified, and until I know what they're after? Why would I offer to show them the property? Well, here's why: to make more money. To make more money. Okay. Think about this. Somebody took the time to call you, and you've invested in them 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes maybe, and you decide that you don't want to show them the house because they haven't given you the right answers to your questions. So in 15 minutes, you've pushed a client away. Maybe you're right and maybe you're wrong. I don't know. But think about this from a seller standpoint. When you go and do a listing presentation with somebody that is thinking about selling your house, that's interviewing 2 or 3 other agents, what do? You talk with them, you get information about them, you spend 15 or 20 minutes on the phone with them, 30 minutes on the phone with them. I don't know how long you spend with them. But then you go and you prepare a listing presentation. You pull up the comparables, you look at the property, you gather information about this particular seller's house. And then you go out and you spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour doing a listing presentation with them. And why do you do that? Why do you do that? Ed, why do you spend 2 hours talking with the seller, preparing for a listing presentation and doing the listing presentation when you have no guarantee that person's going to list with you? You're muted.
My answer?
To earn their business.
Oh, okay.
To earn their business.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, what was your answer going to be, Mickey?
Same thing, to make them want me most.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, Mark, I don't know if I've ever really asked a buyer and or a seller. Well, I know sellers, but buyers, if they're working with somebody else, because I truly try to talk to the client about them so that they get to like me. I think when I first talk to them, I'm being interviewed, and I know that everybody likes to talk about themselves. So the more I can get them to talk to me about them, the more I'll know about them and be able to help them.
Yeah, it's very, very counterintuitive, working with buyers in this way, because, I've been doing this for a long time, and a lot of you guys have been doing it long enough that you've heard the same stories that I have. We went out and we worked with an agent, or we went out and showed a house or two to a buyer, and then we found out that their brother-in-law is a realtor and they want to write something up with their brother-in-law, and we're pissed off. I mean, rightly so, we're upset by that. Because we have wasted 2 hours, or we've wasted an hour, right? And they weren't honest with us, okay? And so when we put that negative experience into perspective, there was no promise when they called us in the first 15 minutes of the conversation. And there's no promise when we show them the first house. And there's no promise when we sell them the second house. In fact, there's really no promise of them working with us until we have built rapport with that client. Now, we're willing to spend an hour or two to prepare for and do a listing presentation in order to win a seller client. And yet we are not willing to spend an hour or two trying to win a buyer client. Why is that? It's a different perspective. It's a different way of thinking. And so I started off the presentation by saying, hey, you know, these times, they are changing. And because the times have changed and the buyer's attitudes and behaviors have changed, we need to change the way that we think too, in order to be more successful. And so the steps that I want us to do is to spend the first part of our interaction with any buyer trying to win the buyer in the same way that we try and win a listing. And I don't know if you're willing to give a buyer 15 minutes or whether you're willing to give them an hour or whether you're willing to give them 2 hours. I mean, you have to decide that for yourself, but it's not really realistic for us to think that we can get a buyer's commitment until we have proven our value to them, proven our worth to them, and showed them what's in it for them. We've all heard the phrase WIIFM. What's in it for me? And so your first interaction with a buyer in the first part of the conversion is to demonstrate to them what's in it for them by working with you. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because I struggled with it. Okay, I struggled with it. The God's honest truth is a lot of us talk about, with our peers in the office is that, if somebody says they're working with another agent, that we're going to tell them, well, have your agent do the business and hang up on them and you're done. I think we lose a lot of opportunities by doing that, personally. I think that if we are helpful in the right ways and we will spend a little bit of time being helpful with people with the proper boundaries, that we will convert a lot of those people that we push away by attracting them with our good behavior, by providing them good value. Now, maybe people agree with me on that and maybe they don't. But I truly believe that the key to being successful more often right now is to be willing to delay gratification and give a buyer an hour's worth of your time to try and develop rapport with them. I mean, maybe that's the number for me. If I give somebody an hour of my time and I'm 1000% client focused and helpful for that hour, if I can get them to talk to me for an hour and interact with me for an hour, there's probably a pretty good chance that I'm going to build enough rapport with them that I'm going to be able to ask them for commitments after that. Okay. I would certainly give a seller an hour's worth of my time in order to get a listing. Why would I not give a buyer the same amount of time to try and convert them to working with me? Something to think about. So again, I'm going to go back into the suggestions. Offer to show them the property. Ask them, what about this property caught your eye? I don't want to sell them the house that they called me about. I want to know what about the house that they called about is important to them. What about this property caught your eye? What interested you in this property that prompted your call today? Do ask them things like, are there any other properties that you have seen that you like? Are there any other properties that you've seen that you would like to see as well? Okay. That will lead you into more questions like, when did you see it? They might say, well, we've been looking at properties for a while and some of the stuff that we've liked has already sold. That tells you that they've been looking for a little bit of time. That's valuable information. And then you can say to them, well, I know the inventory well. Do you remember the property that you liked before? Because even if it's sold, that will give me a clue as to what you're looking for. Think about this. If you can peel back the onion and gather a lot of information from them in this first conversation, what are you looking for? Okay, what are you looking for? One of my favorite questions for new buyers that I talk to after I get them on the phone a little bit, is I ask them, I say, close your eyes and imagine the perfect house for you, the perfect property for you and your family. Close your eyes and would you describe it to me completely? Some people will do that. Some people will do that. I want a house like Little House on the Prairie, this log house. It's out in the open on 5 acres. I don't want to see any neighbors. I want it to be on the lake and I want it for $50,000 owner carry. I love it when they tell me the truth. Okay, what about what it is that they're looking for? It gives me information to work with. Okay. So in order to have this long conversation that I'm asking you guys to have, I want you to remember some of the principles that we've talked about in previous classes. The 80-20 rule. Who remembers what the 80-20 rule is?
We listen 80% and speak 20.
Yes, perfect. And the 20% of the time that we talk is supposed to be great questions. We're supposed to ask them great questions that will get them to talk more. We'll get them to talk more. We want to talk about things that are important to them. One of the challenges that I hear with a lot of the calls with new buyers is that a lot of the buyers call in and they're hell-bent on gathering information. They'll start asking you question after question after, can you rent this? What's the rental history on it? Where's it located? I mean, they'll start going through their list of questions, and it's pretty easy to get sucked into just giving them information and not getting anything in return. And you can keep them on the phone for 5 minutes. They gather all the information that they want. And they say, thank you very much. And they hang up. Okay. So I'm going to suggest that you are proactive rather than reactive. And here's what I mean by that. It's called quid pro quo in the right way. Quid pro quo in the right way is when somebody asks you a question, would this be a great vacation rental? That's a question that they might have. And I would probably say something like they do have a history that I can get for you, or it's in an area that is really popular for vacation rentals. Is the property that you purchase being a good vacation rental one of your most important things? So I'm answering them sort of blandly. I'm giving them some information sort of bland and open-ended, and then I'm following up with a question to gather more information about them. Does that make sense? There's 1,000 things that people will say. How far away from the ski area is it? It's pretty close to both ski areas. Do you want to be walking distance to the ski area, or is within 5 or 10 minutes good enough? So every time they ask you a question to give them information, you want to sort of be bland with it, because the more specific you are with the information that you give them, the more they can disqualify the property. And you always want to follow up with another question to go deeper into it. Now, the question that you need to ask them has to be related to what they asked you. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Is this property close to the ski area? Yeah, it's pretty close to both ski areas. Are you pre-qualified? Do you see how that has nothing to do? Number one, it's one of the questions we don't want you asking, right? It's one of the questions we don't want you asking, but it also messes up the flow of the conversation. Is this property close to the ski area? Yes, it is. Is Moonridge one of the areas that you're searching for specifically? Okay, you want to have your follow-up questions being related to that. And based on their answers, you want to keep the conversation flowing along the topic that is important to them. Okay, any questions so far on that? Okay. The other thing that we've talked about in building rapport, not only is it asking questions because they like to talk about themselves, but it's to mirror and match them. So you want to try to match their tone. You want to try and match their speed, or the way that they speak, how quickly they speak. You want to sort of match their choice of words. Have you ever heard somebody, gosh, I mean, this is really a sort of a value judgment, and it's not meant to be that way, but yet it is. I mean, it's reality. Have you ever met somebody that you talked to that didn't sound very intelligent? Their choice of words were different than what we would use? Okay. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but what I can tell you that is appropriate is when you recognize that when you're talking with somebody, is that you try to speak in the same kind of language that they are using when you're speaking with them. If they speak slowly, speak slowly. Sometimes you'll get somebody that talks in a very, very young vernacular. That's a word you don't use very often, vernacular, right? I would suggest that you don't talk like that with your clients sometimes when you're talking to them. Don't use those kinds of words with people. Use the words that they're talking in, okay? I get people that, hey, bro, what do you think about that house, bro? That's not how I talk, but if I'm in a selling situation, I want to try and use words that's going to make that person comfortable. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So we want to mirror and match in the speed, the tone, the kinds of words that we use. We want to be friendly, but not familiar. Can anybody describe what I mean by that? What comes to mind when I say friendly, but not familiar?
I'm usually too familiar with people. So.
So tell me what you mean by that.
Oh my goodness. An animal lover. Okay, I love animal lovers. And so if anyone wants to, starts talking about their animal, I mean, it's too late. I want to talk about my cat and my dog and oh, horses are great. And my Ruby, she died 2 years ago. Yeah, I can go off like that. And I think the proper thing to do is people love to talk about their pets. And I realize, I'm going on and on. I love it. Show me pictures of your pets. I mean, usually they have them closer than their grandchildren, I find, but it's yeah, they love to talk about their pets too.
Okay. I'm glad that you brought it up, Nikki, because I do the same thing. I mean, a lot of us are passionate. We're passionate people, and we have our interests, and we're certainly active in life and have a lot of things going on. And this sort of goes back to that timeshare salesperson experience that I shared with you. And I have done this going through a couple of different timeshare things where I tried to get the salesperson to talk about themselves, and the best ones absolutely refused to do it. They were very, very well disciplined in not talking about themselves. Now, I don't know whether they were completely uninterested in the questions that I was asking them. I think they were disciplined in it. And so, one of the things, and you identified that, Mickey, is that when somebody talks to about something that we're interested in, it usually turns on our go light, and we start talking about the things that they've talked to us about that's got us interested. And we need every single bit of discipline to avoid doing that. Now, when somebody brings up their pets and they love their pets, we want to talk to them about their pets and their pets that they love. Their grandchildren, same thing. And we are going to be tempted to talk about our interests, and we need to avoid that as much as possible. Okay. Yes, I can relate to that. I've got I love my dog too, but the least we can talk about ourselves, the better off that we're going to be in turning those people into us. Now, you are going to run into people, and I've heard a lot of the calls that you make, Nikki, and that you talk with, is that you get into really long conversations and bond with people. And if you talk with somebody for 15, 20 minutes on the phone, like some of the conversations that you've had, I know you're building rapport. So that's what we're after, because that's how you're going to win the people over to you. Okay. So I started off earlier. I said, people don't know who we are. They don't know what we stand for. They don't know what our company stands for. And I followed up with, and they honestly don't care. They honestly don't care. Most of them, they honestly don't care. But if you talk to them about them and you dig deeper into them and you peel back the onion and demonstrate your sincere interest in them and provide valuable help to them in their process of buying a home, most people are going to begin to warm up to you, and they're going to begin to care about you. They're going to tell their friend when they get off the phone, or their husband when they get off the phone, that was one of the nicest salespeople I've ever talked to. Okay. So hold on for just 1 second. Totally unprofessional. My daughter's buying Taylor Swift tickets, and she said she's buying it out of my Ticketmaster account, and she needed the code for her ticket. So sorry about that. So this is what we do with our buyers is we need to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour being totally and 100 or 1,000% focused on them. Invest an hour. Make the commitment that you're going to invest an hour in your buyer leads if you can keep them on the phone that long before you get rid of them. Because we will do more time than that to try and get a listing. We'll spend a lot more time trying to get a listing. At some point, you're going to realize that the client has warmed up to you. They're open. They're sharing personal information. They're telling you their life story. And I can tell you honestly, I'm sitting here, oh my God, I really don't want to know all this crap. Well, when they start telling you all of this information, it means that they're comfortable with you. It means that you have developed rapport. And so this is the point in the relationship where you now have pretty much their permission to start guiding them and moving them in the direction to the next part, which is your buyer process, how you can actually help them. And so this is going to be the point of our next class, is that we know what the most efficient way to buy a house is. We know the most efficient way to look at the inventory and to know the inventory. We know which lenders are going to do a good job for our clients. We know a lot about this market and about the buying process that we can share with our new buyer. But we can't do that until they have emotionally decided that they're going to work with us. The second thing that we can do is we can express to them how we work. Here's how I work. Here's how I do this. Here's how I do that. And if we're going to use a buyer broker agreement, which I suggest that all of us begin doing shortly, is that it's going to be after you've created that commitment and after you've made that presentation and they have decided they like what you have to offer, that's the correct time to ask them to buy a buyer broker agreement. You never ask a seller to sign a listing before you do your listing presentation. You would never ask a buyer to make a commitment until you have won their business. Does that make sense? So if they are willing to make a second appointment, or you can tell that they have warmed up to you and have started telling you all the details, this is about the time that you have got the right to ask them to move forward and make a commitment with you. And so our next class that we're going to do probably in January is going to be the steps to do your buyer process. What are your standards for a buyer? What are your operating procedures with a buyer? What are the checklists that you're going to follow? And we will cover all of that in our next class.
Thank you.
Cool. Any questions or thoughts? You guys need to help me out here so I know where I'm helping you and where and what areas you guys need a little bit more time and attention from me.
I just want to say for the record, because you asked some questions during this class, I have never been in a vacation rental, timeshare, anything like that presentation.
Wow.
And I am in fact looking in the beginning stages of looking for a new car. So it's weird. I just didn't want you to think I was blowing off the questions.
That's okay. That's okay. I don't know how much self-discipline you have, Nikki, but I can tell you that the first timeshare that we bought, we went through the presentation because Carrie said she wanted to save, we were in Hawaii and we wanted to save the 50% on all of the expenses for the excursions, the scuba diving and the boating and all of these other things. And Carrie promised she wasn't going to buy. She promised she wasn't going to buy. And I said, dear, these are professional salespeople. You got to be aware. And so we went into the presentation and an hour and a half into it, and the guy was good. The guy was good. And so the guy gets done at the very end of it and says, I'm going to let you guys talk about it for a little bit and I'll come back and let you know what you think. So the salesman gets up and walks away, and Carrie looks at me and she says, you know, dear, that makes a lot of sense.
I want to go now just to check out technique. It never occurred to me. Learn from some masters.
They are very, very, very well trained. And so I would say I would go through it. Just, you know, you may end up spending 20 grand if you go through it.
Well, maybe Carrie and I will go together.
No. You might spend a lot of money going through it, but what you will do is if you're watching what they're doing, if you're listening to what they're doing, you're going to see all of the things that I just shared with you. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're trying to make you comfortable. They're trying to give you information and develop trust with you. And they're trying to guide you. The other thing that they're doing is they're gathering all of the information that they can use against you when it comes time to close. When it comes time to close. I mean, when you ask questions like, how often do you come up here? You know, who would use the house when you come up? Oh, your grandkids are going to come up and you want to teach them how to ski. That's what your granddad did. You know, your granddad taught you to ski up here 35 years ago. Now you want to teach your grandkids how to ski. I mean, when you gather all of that information in this long conversation, it's very, very easy, you know, a week later, when you're getting prepared to write an offer for them, to say, you know, can you imagine how much fun you and your grandkids are going to have this winter when you are in this cabin and you're able to come up here with a suitcase and your toothbrush and go up there and teach them how to ski at Snow Summit? Can you imagine how fun that's going to be? That is an emotional close that is more powerful than anything else that you can say to them. And the only reason that you know it is because you took the time to listen to them and to talk to them and to get to know them. So go take a timeshare presentation and hear the questions, go through the process, and then listen to how unfair they are when they're trying to close you. When you're saying, no, I promised I wasn't going to buy. Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I'll tell Eric it was your advice. Okay.
Oh,
how's
boy.
that sound?
There we go. Yeah. Now I'm really in trouble. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions today before we go? All right. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.
Mark.
Thanks.
Thank you.